All right. Well, it looks like most everyone who was in the waiting room has joined, so we can get started here and let folks trickle in. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar on mastering stakeholder mapping, especially as we come in to this new year in 2021 with a new Congress and new legislators at the state level. My name is Peter Tite, and I am a team lead on Quorum's customer success team. Sorry, so if we can go to the next slide here. Great. That's me. I'm a team lead on our customer success team, and my team is responsible for helping our largest clients use Quorum's stakeholder engagement tools to map, track, change, and report on their policy landscape. I'm so excited to be here to show you how you can do the same, especially as we're at this critical point in the year and in the cycle. So today I'm going to review why stakeholder mapping is so important, cover 6 different techniques that you can choose to organize your stakeholder mapping, walk you through some sheets within Quorum and how that will actually work, and then also just cover some best practices that you might be interested. I'll try to leave some time for questions here at the end, so feel free to submit your questions through the chat box, and we can get to those at the end. Now, moving into the content for the day, what is stakeholder mapping? Stakeholder mapping is a unified tracking system that collects and measures outgoing engagement with your stakeholders. This provides each individual on your team with the most up-to-date information on where each of your stakeholders stands on your issues and with your organization. So the first step in stakeholder mapping, I cannot emphasize this enough as someone who works with clients, is to start with clean data. I know that we've got a mix of current and prospective clients on the call today. So one question that I have for you, and feel free to chat this in or just think about this as we're going through, is where does your team manage your contact database? I've seen clients come to Quorum from all of these places, whether they just have all of their information about their stakeholders in a spreadsheet, whether they're using another CRM and it's just not really doing what they need it to do, or relying on their Outlook contacts, or God forbid, the business cards in the top right drawer of their desk. All of these situations are possible to get that into Quorum, but it is really important for your team to be prioritizing having good quality data on the front end so that we can do some of the cool things that the team that we're going to be showing you today. Great, thanks Morgan for the feedback there. So now, why is it important to map your stakeholders? Stakeholder mapping is a critical step in the stakeholder engagement strategy, and it's going to allow you to identify and track who your most important stakeholders are. So good stakeholder mapping is going to set your organization up by success by measuring the impact of the work at the end of the year, starting with quickly identifying key relationships, tracking those engagements with your stakeholders, and measuring that ROI at the end of the year. So the first step here is identifying, one of the reasons it's great is identifying who your relationships are. And these are all questions really I've gotten from clients. So sometimes I'll ask, when we're thinking about how we should set up stakeholder mapping with a client organization, I'll ask, to the head of the team or the office, what questions do you want to be able to answer using your stakeholder management tool? So some questions that they'll say is, I want to know who our top stakeholder is on healthcare. I want to know who we have in Massachusetts. What team member is going to be best suited to reach out to a particular stakeholder, or which stakeholder should we invite to our next event? These are all questions that Quorum can help solve or help answer using stakeholder mapping. Next slide here. The second real key piece is to track the engagements with your team to make sure that your engagement schedule aligns with your broader goals on the team. So if your top issue is healthcare, answering the question, are we meeting with those healthcare stakeholders at a tight enough clip? Are we meeting with bipartisan coalitions of stakeholders, or do we only have relationships with one side of the aisle? And even, are we meeting with a diverse coalition of stakeholders, from different types of backgrounds, so that we can be, aligned with maybe our corporate diversity and inclusion objectives. One of our or another question would be, is one of our team members knocking it out of the park and driving engagement with their stakeholders, where another team member is lagging and maybe needs a little more support or needs to pick it up? This is all going to be dependent on your team using Quorum to log their interactions with their stakeholders. And this is, this might look like forwarding their email chains into Quorum so that they're maintained in kind of an institutional knowledge, or actually using Quorum's mobile app to log interactions on the go to say, I just had a meeting with so-and-so, and these were the issues we discussed, and this is how that meeting went. So the third component is to measure the ROI of stakeholder engagement efforts. This is something that I've really seen some of my most sophisticated and kind of largest clients do really successfully using Quorum. And the way that they do this is they evaluate their stakeholder network at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year. If you were really advanced, you could do this at the beginning of the quarter and at the end of the quarter. But for this example, let's say we started the year with 53 champions, 158 folks who are marked as neutral, and 42 detractors. Now, throughout the year, we're going to be meeting with these stakeholders, sending them engagements, tracking what they are saying, in social media or in the press, and trying to move them ultimately from neutral to champions and from detractors up to neutral. So in the end of the year, if you're able to pull this report and say that we moved those folks we doubled the number of our champions, and we halved the number of our detractors, then that's a really powerful way for you to start proving the ROI of your stakeholder engagement strategy, rather than just relying on being able to tell your boss, I've got the best relationships and I know everyone I need to know. So this is a really cool strategy that happy to talk about or answer any questions about at the end here. Now, so today we're going to be showing some examples using US senators as your stakeholders, but I want to be clear that these practices and systems can be replicated with state, local, international policy members, or just non-government third-party stakeholders like your grasstops advocates. So the first strategy that we're going to cover is mapping stakeholders by issue. Stakeholder mapping by issue is one way to map your stakeholders based on the issues that they work on or really care about, using Quorum's issue management feature. So by mapping your stakeholders by issues, you can quickly answer the question, for example, what key stakeholders do we have on renewable energy? This way, if new legislation is introduced and you want to quickly sort for the key stakeholders with whom you need to communicate and engage with on that issue, you can. So this is really a helpful tool, and I'm going to show you how you can actually build this in a sheet in Quorum to track the stakeholders that you're working with by the issue that they care about. So in this case here, we've got US senators, as I mentioned, and we've got columns pulled in, for example, based on the number of meetings that we've tagged to a particular issue and whether or not we've tagged that official as well to that issue based on things like their committee assignments or statements in social media. And this is where you can see that, for example, your team is spending too much time talking about autonomous vehicles with folks who really care about privacy, and not enough time talking to folks who care about autonomous vehicles, about autonomous vehicles. So this is totally customizable to you. It could be any of your issues. And these are really dynamic ways to report out on the work your team is doing. Now, the next strategy I want to cover is the ability to map stakeholders by the relationships that they have with your team. So the vast majority of my clients decide to assign relationship holders to their stakeholders that they're targeting. Some will decide to kind of take the divide and conquer approach. For example, one team member will work with Democrats and one will work with Republicans. Or some folks share the load where several members are assigned to own a given relationship and they kind of deal based on the issues that they work on. Either way, setting up some really clear internal guidelines about which team members should own which relationships. It's going to help your organization promote accountability and stay organized. It's also really embarrassing if you walk into an office and your team member was just there and you don't know about that interaction. So Quorum's going to also be really helpful in that we rolled out some new functionality over the summer that allows you to draft one email and then have each individual email be sent from the person on your team who owns the relationship with that stakeholder. So if you've mapped all of the all of the state senators across the country to a particular relationship holder, then your admin back in your national office can send an email to every single state senator, and each individual person is going to receive that from the person who they know at your organization, which is going to help promote a personalized touch, but also really save you time in having to have each person send out all of the individual emails themselves through Outlook rather than using Quorum's Outbox tool. So the sheet here that we pulled up is based on the team member relationships that are in place. And so you can have columns showing who on the team owns the relationship that is an active Quorum user. But I'll also note that you can assign contacts to own relationships as well. This is something that I've seen some of my international clients use, where they maybe want to have the vice president of global government affairs is the one who owns the relationship with Boris Johnson, but also the president of their European business or their British business unit should also be associated with that official, and you can kind of keep track of who those internal relationships are. So we've got the ability to both assign team members as well as contacts to these these officials in this example, and then you can track who's having the most meetings. Ideally, you don't want to have a situation like Tammy Baldwin, where we've got Alex is meeting with her, Ari's meeting with her, Bethany's meeting with her. This isn't a good experience for your stakeholders, and this is something that you should be tracking and making sure to keep at the front of mind here. Now, this next strategy is really interesting. This is about the ability to map your stakeholders by the interest and influence matrix. So each of your stakeholders has a certain level of interest in an issue, as well as a level of influence on that issue. Knowing this information, you can build a matrix mapping interest versus influence and providing you with kind of 4 different quadrants or categories of stakeholders. You've got your high interest and high influence stakeholders, in the top right. Then you've got low interest but high influence, low interest and low influence, who are kind of your duds, and then low interest and low influence and high interest. So these can be done using Quorum Sheets tool, but this knowledge can help you prioritize your stakeholders that you should be engaged with. So it may be obvious, but your first priority should be meeting with the folks that have a high interest and a high influence on the issue that you care about. The next best priority, though, should be folks who have high influence but low interest, because these are folks that you can spend time communicating with and talking about the great work that your organization is doing, sharing information about that work on those issues. And then because they're influential, they have the ability to make change if you can just make them care about it. So there's a few different ways that you can determine, and we can pull the sheet up here, there's a few different ways that you can determine a stakeholder's interest and influence. So first, you can use a qualitative system based on your team's interactions, prior knowledge with those stakeholders, to just say that this is, a mover and shaker on a particular topic. Or you can take a quantitative approach using data points like their legislative activity, the dialogue that they are putting out in our documents data set. And so your interest score could be based on the number of times that they've talked about an issue in documents, such as social media or press releases and floor statements. And then that influence score could be based on the number of bills they've passed out of committee, for example, on a particular topic. So someone who's really influential on, on energy, and that they are really an effective legislator on passing legislation on energy, but they don't actually talk about solar panels all that much, or they don't talk about renewable energy. If you can work with them to, educate them on those topics, then that's going to be your best shot at really moving the needle from a legislative perspective. Now, I mentioned again, we're using these examples from, from senators, but if this was, if these folks were, contacts in your system, you can always take that qualitative approach and have your team just give everyone a score and build that matrix that way. So this is a really kind of advanced next level tool or strategy that I'd be curious to see if folks are already doing, and if they're doing it in different ways. Now let's go back to our spreadsheet here, or our presentation. And the next system is a tiered approach. So with a tiered system, your organization can give a stakeholder, for example, a number 1 through 3, with tier 1 actually being like your most influential stakeholders, and tier 3 maybe being less important folks. This is, up to you to customize how you want to describe this, but something that I've seen clients do that are actually really effective here is by using, assigning a meaning to each of these tiers. So holding your team accountable by saying that every tier 1 stakeholder we should meet with at least once a month. Or every tier 2 stakeholder we should meet with every quarter, and every tier 3 stakeholder we should try to meet with every year. This is a way to kind of hold your team accountable to these tiers, and then be able to use Quorum to keep track of that. So if you go ahead and click into the sheet here, the example that we gave here is our tiers for these folks. So we actually pulled in this really great column, which is the green, blue, red one, which is days inactive. And what that means is that you can set this kind of as a red, amber, green color-coded system to say that if anyone, if we are committed to logging an interaction with tier 1 stakeholders every single month, then the days inactive should never climb more than 30 days, because we're committed to all of those, meeting with those folks every month. So for some folks on the right where you see that, it's been 70 days since we met with them, then that's going to give you an opportunity to go back to your team and say, should we reassess the tier here? Is this person really not as important as we thought they were at the beginning of the session? Or should we more likely go get in that office and make sure that we're getting in front of them to meet with them? And so this is totally customizable to you. You can set these benchmarks, but really having some way to hold your team accountable to specific benchmarks is really a valuable way to be more actionable with your stakeholder mapping strategy. Great. Now, here, our 5th strategy that we're going to look at is the ability to tag folks with champion, neutral, and detractor. And I like to think about this, and we talked about this a little bit in the middle, or at the beginning, is the ability to kind of move folks within this relationship ladder, so to speak. So moving the folks who are neutral to be champions, and moving those detractors to just being neutral on you, for example. Mapping your stakeholders as champion, neutral, and detractor is going to allow you to see everyone that has influence on your organization's issues, and really what direction do they lean. So this is helpful because it's going to give you the ability, once you put in the work on the front end, to map these stakeholders, to identify who on your team is able to move the needle with these folks. And who's most interested and involved. A good question just came in through the chat, is like, what's the difference between champion, neutral, detractor, and tiers? These are two similar strategies, but in my experience, the way clients use the tier function is actually more about who on, how important are these people? So if you're looking at, maybe you're a trade association, your tier 1 stakeholders might be the presidents and CEOs of your member companies. The tier 2 might be the VP of external engagement at the member companies. And tier 3 might be the facility manager or just the general employees of those member companies. So the tiers are less dynamic typically, and you're not moving folks from tiers as often unless they get promoted and they're somehow more important now. So it's totally up to you how you want to do this, but this is kind of, from my experience, the difference there. And if we look at a champion, neutral, detractor sheet, there's all sorts of ways that this can be leveraged on your team. So for example, we talked about keeping track of the days inactive and the number of days it's been since you met with them, but also gut checking those relationships. So for example, I've got a client who their metric for success is whether or not their external stakeholders are retweeting their corporate Twitter account, whether they're using hashtags on social media that align with their issues or organization. And so this gives our our decision maker over there the opportunity to say, hey, Peter, you marked these 5 people as champions, but they've never, they haven't talked about us in the last 9 months. And we haven't been in there to meet with them. So how do we really know that they are champion bars? And that's all, kind of gonna just give you more insight, and it will help you hold your team accountable as well, and also really show off the people that are able to move the needle with these stakeholders, because you want to be able to reward those folks. So yes, we will definitely share out a link in these sheets in Quorum. I'll note that these are publicly accessible. So within the Quorum system, you can create personalized kind of reports like this. And for example, that stakeholder alignment column would be editable for Quorum users. So if you were looking at this and you decided, this person is actually not a champion, we could edit that to be neutral from your Quorum account right from this page. Good question. All right, now lastly, I'm really excited about this one because this is a new feature that we have recently added after really months and years of clients asking for something like this. And it's going to be really a blend of 2 different strategies. So we've talked about the ability to map by issue and by champion, neutral, and detractor. And this next strategy is the ability to map by to have separate issue alignment on different issues. So this is where you can see on the right here, we have the ability to mark someone as a champion on 2 different issues, and then neutral on a 3rd issue, and maybe against you all on a final issue. And depending on what the priority is internally of those issues, that can give you a better sense of where the work needs to be put in for the team. So using an example, let's look at Tammy Baldwin as our test case here. If we go to the next slide, and she could be listed as a champion for healthcare for your organization, but a detractor on transportation. And if you care about a wide range of issues, and especially if there are some issues that are higher priority than other issues, this is going to give you a better sense of whether this is really a relationship that is in good shape, or if you need to put some more work in here. Great. So after you've done this stakeholder mapping, this is all really to help you imagine the world that you can live in once you've done the stakeholder mapping. So I want to cover some best practices and some of the cool and innovative ways I've seen clients do this, after they've built out their mapping strategy. So the first thing that I'll see is after you've come up with your mapping system, you can set a goal for your mapping steps and build the steps for achieving that goal. So if your goal is, for example, to grow the list of your top tier stakeholders, your champions, then you can focus on the folks in the middle and try to move those folks from neutral to champions. If your goal is to decrease the number of your detractors, then you might have a different strategy to engage with those detractors directly and try to get them to move to neutral. And if you're planning a number of initiatives on a particular topic or issue, for example, then you're going to want to focus on the stakeholders who are most interested in that topic. The possibilities are really endless here. In terms of your communication strategy, this is where I see kind of the most successful clients really separate themselves. And this is by having a map of all your stakeholders to be proactively and reactively communicating on, depending on what that policy landscape looks like. So if your stakeholders are mapped, for example, by the sentiment, so the champion, neutral, detractor, then you might want to send a different version of an email to your champions than your detractors. That's just kind of common knowledge, but a lot of folks really don't go, if you haven't done that mapping, then you're probably just going to send the same note to everyone. That's not really going to get through as effectively. Similarly, if you're going to be sending out your invites to your holiday party or your panel discussion, maybe you want to send that first round of invites to your tier one stakeholders, your top tier folks. After you've gotten those RSVPs come in, you could maybe open up the invites to those tier two stakeholders after a couple of weeks. And then maybe like the Monday before the event, when you're trying to fill out the rest of the room, you extend the invite to those tier three stakeholders or junior level people that are less important for you to be engaging with. Another best practice that I've really seen here is to have a system for updating your mapping throughout the year. This could be something as simple as just scheduling a meeting with your team with one of these sheets pulled up, and having everyone go input their map, their custom fields, their classifications of these stakeholders at the beginning of the year, and scheduling a meeting for 6 months in and just pulling it up on a shared screen and saying, okay, how do we feel about this person? Are they really a champion? Go defend your classification there, and then decide whether that's moved or not. And that's going to help you make sure that these are kept up to date and these are going to continue to be valuable for you. The more, like kind of the theme here is the more work you put in on the front end, the more value you're going to be able to measure and change at the end of the year. I also think that it's really important to set the standard for what's included in your team's tracking, so that the data is clean and consistent. With garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. So there's some kind of automation and steps that you can take in Quorum to set up an email alert if someone has forgotten to fill out a issue alignment, for example, and making sure that your team is logging their interactions really regularly to help inform this mapping. Now, okay, I'm getting some notes that there's some connection issues. I hope this on your end and not me. We've seen some success with advanced success here in doing performance reviews, for example. So having this being something that people pull up in their performance review with their manager to say, I was able to move this many stakeholders into the champions bucket, or I was able to mitigate the risk of these detractors using this particular strategy. And even having, an incentive to say, whoever logs the most meetings with champions in the next month, we're going to give them some sort of prize. This can be fun. It doesn't have to be big brother watching you. This is really totally about your team leveraging technology to stay better informed, to be more strategic, and ultimately to prove the ROI of the work you're doing on the ground. Great. So with that, I want to see if there are any other questions from the audience. We definitely do plan to share out the slides here to everyone who attended, and those links should work for you to address. So one question that came in your opinion, issue alignment could be most helpful for the stakeholder engagement technique when we are in the first stages of the process. So if I'm thinking about this question, that kind of when should you be doing the issue alignment? What's great is this new issue alignment feature that we discussed is going to be time stamped. So if you mark that someone has, if you mark someone as a champion on energy, then there's going to be a little kind of blurb at the bottom that says Martha made that assessment on January 13th. And that means that your team can come back and look and say, oh, we actually haven't reassessed where they align with us since January. What do we think now, maybe in June? So I do think that with all of these, especially if you're a new client, you're coming to Quorum, the more you can put on in the front end to get a kind of a realistic cross section of where your stakeholders land on your issues, the better you're going to be able to track that change over time. Good question, though. Thank you. Great. Another question from the audience is, it can be hard to get my team to log their meeting notes and update our sheet when we use stakeholder mapping. How can I prove the adoption of our stakeholder best practices? This is a really great question, and something that a lot of clients are trying to figure out, and it's something that our customer success team really loves helping with. So the team tracking in terms of meeting notes, that's just after you meet with an external stakeholder, making it second nature to pull out your phone or pull up your window in Quorum and type in the meeting notes that transpired from that interaction. Something that I've seen some strategies from clients is really having a strong top-down mandate. So saying, this isn't an optional thing, this is a mandatory, this is how we assess that you're doing your job in some ways. And so having that top-down mandate goes a long way. And Quorum's really done a good job making it as easy as possible to get those interactions from a technical perspective logged into Quorum. So the fields can be customized and the forms can be simplified. So it's a really lightweight process for those users. But also some things like rewarding, publishing a graph at the end of every week in a monthly or a weekly email that says who on the team has logged the most meetings and who have those meetings been with. That's a really cool way to help leverage this. I also have, we don't have enough time to go through this today, but we just released a really great feature called dashboards, which allows you to create, a stakeholder mapping dashboard. So you could visualize all of this information. For example, the, number of champions, number of neutral, number of detractor, broken out by issues, across your entire issue portfolio, and have all that information live on one auto-updating dashboard that folks can refresh and reference as they go throughout their week and throughout the year. So that's a really great way to just make this information more visible to the team, make it really easy for team members to go in and use Quorum, and then ultimately to report on this in a systematic way. Great. Any other questions from the audience here? These are great. One question here I see is, how did you make the list of stakeholders we were referring to within Quorum? So that's a really good question. So Maybe Cyrus, if we can go back to that issue or one of the other sheets here, we can talk through this here. So, for example, the tier, let's do this interest influence sheet there. So in Sheets, you have the ability to customize the columns as well as the rows. So the columns we chose to pull in were mentions of, mentions that these stakeholders have made of energy, solar panels, bills that they've passed out of committee on the topic of energy. These can be really endlessly customized, but you can also customize the rows here. So if we wanted to decide, for example, that we're only going to show someone as a row on this spreadsheet if they are assigned to a team member. So that way you're going to have, only the people that you have active relationships with are going to appear as a row here. So that can be an auto updating spreadsheet so that if we go make a new relationship, we go add a team member assignment to another one of these stakeholders, then you're going to be able to, they'll be automatically added to this tracking sheet here. So this is totally up to you guys to customize, and it's it's really dynamic. I've got folks that create sheets that are based on show me all of the officials that we've logged an interaction with in the last 30 days. And that's a rolling list. So that's going to show you, just the folks that you've been meeting with, and then information about their sentiment on your organization, their track record on legislation, and also what their dialogue has been, who their staffers are. So this is totally up to you, and this is something that our customer success team, and I can speak for my team in particular, we really get excited about helping clients with this. This is the most fun part of our jobs, is helping a client think strategically about, where do I want to get to? What do I want to be able to report on at the end of the year? And then work back step by step and say, what do we need to do today to be able to pull this report and show this, this movement in 9 months or a year? Let's see if we have any other questions here. All right, well, unless actually here, there's one more. Is stakeholder mapping the kind of service you sell piecemeal? So that's an interesting question. So Quorum's products are split into kind of two different categories of products. You have products that are where Quorum provides the majority of the information. So those are going to be like our federal and state and local products, where you've got official profiles that are pre-populated after an election. And then you've got products that are more customer data centric. So these are going to be really our stakeholder or our grassroots tool. So we do have a stakeholder engagement platform, which is a tool that you can buy, which is really a blank CRM. So you can put in whoever your stakeholders are into that database. So whether they're, we've been talking about U.S. senators, but if your organization's really interested in influencing, the heads of local nonprofits that are influential in your community, you could add those profiles into Quorum, into our stakeholder tool, and really do pretty much all of what we've been talking about today by marking them as champion, neutral, detractor, tracking their change in sentiment over time, and assigning relationships, and setting up a personalized communication strategy for those folks. So I think that probably your best bet here would be to reach out to ask for a demo, and I'd be happy to connect you with someone on our sales team to walk you through what those different options look like. But we are, we're always happy to help kind of talk through how stakeholder engagement strategy can fit into your workflow using technology. Great. All right. Well, I am really glad that all of you decided to join today. You're a great audience today, and really looking forward to continuing the conversation. Maybe seeing you guys sign up as clients, and then I'll get to work with you more directly. Wonderful. Have a good rest of your day. Stay safe, and enjoy the rest of your week.